Hello, everybody. Welcome to Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. I'm your host, the Dooster. I have a little story I want to share with you today. Happened in 1878 in Robertson County, Tennessee. I run up on this while I was doing research for my book, Execution of Murder. It's also featured in my book, Vigilante Justice. If you would like any of my books, they are available on Amazon. I also have copies here at home I can direct ship out. If you would like a signed copy, shoot me an email, ghosthunter911@gmail.com. Again, that is ghosthunter911@gmail.com. Just shoot me an email with your address and all in it, and I will make sure you get a signed copy delivered to your door. Also, they are available at the Robertson County Archives in Springfield. They're also available in Adams, Tennessee at Moss's Restaurant. So if you're in the area, you can stop by and pick up one. Or I can send you one either way, or you can get one off Amazon. It's totally your choice. I call this the Tale of Two Franks. Like I said, this happened in 1878. Frank Sadler and Frank Pearson became acquainted while sharing a cell in a Sumner County, Tennessee jail, where they both were serving 90-day sentences on a charge of vagrancy and panhandling. When they were released from jail, they immediately hightailed it out of Gallatin, but not before breaking into an unoccupied residence on the outskirts of town and pilfering some food, a couple of pistols, and a shotgun. With no particular destination in mind, the two vagabonds kept to the shadows as much as possible as they made their way north toward the Kentucky state line, stopping to spend the night in the woods on the John Groves farm near Mitchell, a small farming community just south of the Tennessee-Kentucky state line. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, and the two men who were easing their way through the woods stopped and crouched behind a rotting tree stump. From their vantage point, they could see the old farmhouse in the distance, and seeing no activity around it other than the dog looking in their direction, slowly stood and continued along the way. Their moves were slow and deliberate as they made their way amongst the trees, stopping every few steps to cast a quick glance over their shoulders to make sure they weren't being followed. The Louisville and Nashville road was highly traveled, and they tried their best to remain out of sight as they made their way north toward the Kentucky line. I guess you could say they were vagrants in the true sense of the word. Some people call them tramps, as they had no real home or actual jobs. They roamed the countryside, picking up $1 or $2 and an occasional handout whenever they could. An odd job here and there provided them with enough change to buy a drink or two and put a little food in their stomachs. On this particular day, Mrs. Groves heard the dog barking, but paid it no mind as she made her way toward the spring, which was located several yards from the house in the edge of the woods. She walked along a well-worn path, having made the trek to fetch water hundreds, if not thousands of times in her life. Today would be no different, or so she thought. Sadler and Pearson saw some movement up ahead and quickly took refuge behind a couple of large oak trees. Peering out behind the trees, they were surprised to see a woman dipping water from a spring beside the creek. Sadler and Pearson glanced at each other and grinned as a fiendish plot began to take place. Not a word was spoken, but each one knew what the other had in mind. And they had weapons. She was defenseless. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. She never saw them coming. They rushed in and was upon her before she knew they were even there. Sadler got to her first, shoved her to the ground, pinned her down and held his pistol to her head, while Pearson tied her hands. They then yanked her up and warned her if she made a sound, they would kill her on the spot. She was at their mercy as they dragged her deeper and deeper into the woods. They held her captive for over 2 hours, taking turns as they brutally raped her repeatedly. Finally, when all their desires and needs had been fulfilled, they let her go before disappearing into the forest. Battered and bleeding, Miss Grove slowly made her way back to the wood, out through the woods and undergrowth, and arrived at home about the same time as her husband, who had been working in the field that morning. On hearing what had happened and getting his wife medical attention, Mr. Groves alerted the community, and the immediate search for the culprits ensued. Several men were brought before Mrs. Groves, but she could not positively identify any of them as her attackers. The search went on for several days with no arrest, and a $750 reward was posted for the arrest and conviction of the perpetrators. Sadler and Pearson quickly fled the state with a large posse of over 150 men in hot pursuit. They ended up in Russellville, Kentucky, where they robbed a man at gunpoint. Then, using the money they had just acquired in that robbery, attempted to buy train tickets to Texas, but they were $5 short on the price of the ticket. They were in the process of making their way west when the posse caught up with them. The leaders of the posse were T.W. Wright, J.D. Somerville, J.M. Smart, and Wiley Groves, who just happened to be the brother of John Groves and the brother-in-law of Mrs. Groves. Pearson and Sadler were taken to Springfield and lodged in a Robertson County jail. Fearing mob violence, Sheriff Jones moved them to Nashville for safekeeping. He was only delaying the inevitable. When the defendants were brought back to Springfield for trial, news of their return spread like wildfire. Tension was running high in the county, and it didn't take long for vigilante justice reared its ugly head. In the wee hours of June 20th, a lynch mob rode into town and completely surrounded the jail. Armed pickets were dispatched in all directions to guard against any outside interference, and the mob leader, along with several more, entered the jail. Kicking down the door to the sheriff's residence, they demanded the keys, and Sheriff Jones resisted as long as he possibly could before handing the keys over. The leader then demanded Jones to unlock the cell containing Sadler and Pearson, but he absolutely refused to do so. Sheriff Jones and his wife were held at gunpoint while the mob leader searched each cell for the perpetrators, which took several minutes to do. Finally, a positive ID was made, the cell door was unlocked, and the prisoners were removed, kicking and screaming. Pearson pleaded for his life, swearing his innocence of the crime that he was accused of, and he swore if he was allowed to stand trial, he had no doubt that a jury would find him innocent. Sadler remained silent as he was dragged outside and mounted on horseback behind one of the mob leaders. Pearson, still yelling and demanding his innocence, was done likewise, and the mob quickly galloped off in an easterly direction toward Cross Plains. About 3 miles out of town, the mob came to a stop near a large tree beside the road. Pearson and Sadler were removed from the horses and dragged over to the tree. A couple of old greasy plow lines were thrown over the lowest limb, which was barely 6 feet off the ground. A makeshift noose was tied in each and placed around the necks of Pearson and Sadler as they stood there helpless against the mob. They were then hoisted up by hand, the loose slack pulled from the plow reins, and tied off. They then lowered the prisoners, stood back, and watched as the pair swung from the limb. mere inches from the ground. Unlike most hangings, where the victim suffers a broken neck from the fall and death is almost instantaneous, Pearson and Sadler both died of strangulation, which takes considerably longer and is much more painful. The mob looked on as their prisoners kicked and squirmed as they struggled to breathe. When they had drawn their last breath and it was determined that all life had expired, the lynch mob mounted up and headed east. Shortly after daybreak, word reached Springfield that 2 bodies were found hanging from a tree just east of town, and multitudes of citizens flocked to the area to witness the grisly scene. They came on horseback, in buggies, in wagons, and some even came on foot. They found the bodies hanging with their shoulders almost touching, and the feet of both men about 6 inches off the ground. There were no other marks of violence visible on the bodies, which is highly unusual, as in most lynchings the bodies were usually riddled with bullets. It was also noted that the plow lines used to hang them were so old and worn that it was a wonder they hadn't broken just from the weight. After Sheriff Jones arrived at the scene and completed his investigation, the bodies were cut down and a jury of inquest was conducted. Afterwards, the bodies of Pearson and Sadler were placed in pauper coffins and buried in a single grave near the tree on which they died. After the lynching, Wright, Somerville, Smart, and Groves, the citizens who had captured Pearson and Smith, filed a petition with the governor of Tennessee to claim the reward he had previously offered. Their claim was denied, as the reward offer was for the arrest and conviction, and since they were lynched and not convicted for any court of law, the reward offer was null and void. I say this is a true story that happened in Robertson County, 1878. It's featured in my book, Vigilante Justice. If you'd like a copy, shoot me an email, ghosthunter911@gmail.com, and I'll make sure you get one. They're also available on Amazon and Archives in Springfield and Moss's Restaurant in Adams, Tennessee. So I hope you enjoyed it. Come back to see me again. This is a Dooster, Cryptids and Critters Paranormal. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.